Well, welcome everybody to sunny morning and the annual RAC F-gas question time, where we aim to talk about all things F-gas. Once again, we're delighted to welcome Chemours as our sponsor for this event, and we'll be hearing from Mark Hughes later. And once again, we're equally delighted to have a whole roster of experts, the leading lights of F-gas and the supply chain, to tell us all about their experience and their perspective, and hopefully to look forward to the future. It's called question time for a reason. We need questions for it to work when we get to the panel debates. Otherwise, it's just me, and we know nobody wants that. So can I urge you to use the Q&A section? Don't put your questions in chat, please, and keep the questions short and to the point. And as we've learned from plenty of Zoom question and answer sessions, don't hit return halfway through your question or you'll end up asking several questions. And that's all from me. There's no housekeeping beyond that, except to say we aim to keep the time. That's what we say every year. Aim to keep the time and to finish by 12. The answer is in the hands of the speakers. Without further ado, you'll hear that at least 6 times. If I go over 6, I have to pay a penalty. Let me hand over to Graham Fox, who's head of technical at Brazing, head of technical at Refcom, head of technical everything F-gas, and he's got plenty of news to share because he was at the stakeholders meeting with the government yesterday. So, Graham, over to you.
Good morning. Thank you, Andrew. Just quickly share my screen. And try and minimize this window. There we go. Okay, yeah, thank you, Andrew, for the introduction, and thank you to you and your team for putting this on again. I had hoped we'd be back to proper events by now, hopefully soon. I'm going to kick off with a brief overview of what's under discussion in the F-gas review process at the Commission and here in the UK. The EU instigated another review process last year with a view to having proposed new regulatory framework ready for the end of next year for implementation January 2023. And DEFRA have consistently stated their intention to mirror as closely as possible whatever they do in the EU. As Andrew said there, yesterday afternoon we had a UK stakeholder workshop with DEFRA to lay out the path which they see as taking us here along the same sort of timeline as in the EU. So let's start with the all familiar phase down graph and where we're heading. Last year there was still uncertainty, and now it's all clear, right? Maybe not. But we do know that we now have GB regulations. So under the EU Withdrawal Act, Northern Ireland remained under the auspices of the EU single market. I won't get into the rights and wrongs of that approach here, nor of the resultant debacle at the customs points in Northern Ireland caused by that decision. What it has done is it's made things clearer and simpler for the Republic of Ireland in the short term, but the UK Single Market Bill remains in the sidelines, ready to take precedence in Northern Ireland if needed. So on the phase down, Great Britain has taken a share of the old EU market size and determined that this is what we need here in mainland part of the UK. The rate of change of the phase down has not altered at all. GB quota holders need to be registered as a GB quota holder, and reporting must be done through the portal which the Environment Agency have set up. Simply put, if you are placing bulk HFCs on the market in Great Britain, then you must apply for a quota and register and report for that use. If you as a company also place HFCs in the EU market, including Northern Ireland, then you must also apply for an EU quota if you don't already have one, and register and report on their portal as well. There is no shortcut nor any ability to report for both usages on one portal. We have left the EU single market and they must be treated as separate. If you want advice on that point, then please do ask the Refcom team and we'll point you in the right direction. We cannot do it for you. Yes, people have asked us that, but we will give advice where we can. And quota was certainly a big talking point during the Q&A session yesterday in the stakeholder workshop. On qualifications and certification, there are two sides to this. One is the company certification and the other is personnel qualification certification. So I need to clarify this because there still remains confusion about what constitutes an F-gas certificate. A UK F-gas certificate is a company registration certificate. That is issued by Refcom or an alternative such as Bureau Veritas or Quidos. Please be clear as well that the F-gas register is not the F-gas register. They are one of 3 F-gas registers. And Refcom is the main one with around 80% of the UK market on our register. We're also the only UK F-gas register who actually supports industry in events like this one, and the only UK F-gas register who can deal with technical advice and queries in-house and on the spot. And as far as I'm aware, the only UK F-gas register who the Environment Agency and DEFRA consult with on technical issues. Now, a sole trader or one-man band who performs work for a third party, regardless of whether or not they supply equipment or gas or anything else, must be registered as a sole trader micro business with Refcom or equivalent, or they are working illegally. The word company in this context does not imply that only incorporated businesses limited by guarantee, for example, need to be registered. It's anyone who's working in the sector as an entity. So post-Brexit, the UK issued F-gas certificates can no longer be used anywhere in the EU, including the Republic of Ireland. We had hoped to sort this issue out before we left the EU, but the lockdown and an inability to travel to Dublin has held this up. We have been in discussion with the Irish government, though, and we've identified an Irish location to set up Refcom Ireland. So we're just waiting for the Irish government to do the legislative changes required for us to formalise that and be able to issue EU certificates from our Irish office. So watch this space, as they say. I'm sure we'll be shouting about it once it's in place. For the time being, if you want to work in Ireland or anywhere else in the EU, you will probably need to apply to the Irish F-gas register for this year. And then hopefully it'll be sorted before renewal time at the end of December. I've said at previous events that RAC Magazine has run that the Irish F-gas register operates theirs on an annual renewal basis, 1st of January to 31st December, whereas in the UK we have 3-year cycles for the F-gas registration. Okay, on personnel, an engineer's F-gas qualification is not an F-gas certificate entitling them to work as a subcontractor. It is a certificate of qualification outlined in Article 10.4 and 10.7, which enables the company to engage their services directly as an employee. For reference, Article 10.4 identifies engineers who have undertaken a suitable evaluation process to demonstrate underpinning knowledge. And Article 10.7 allowed for those with existing qualifications under the original F-gas requirements to remain valid without having to be reassessed. That is now becoming an issue, as I'll come to. But first, last year, we discussed the issue of expiring certificates for engineers and the fact that last spring's F-gas question time went out at a time when training centres were all closed. I reported at that time that we had asked DEFRA for guidance in the March. As it transpired, we had to wait until August for any real guidance, and that was that anyone with an expired certificate cannot work. Key worker status didn't seem to matter to the government lawyers, and in December, DEFRA confirmed that anybody with an expired certificate must retake a full F-gas course. They cannot just do a renewal course. Now, that obviously has an impact on the sector, as we've become used to training centres allowing recently expired certificates to be used to access a renewal course. But apparently, that is no longer legally acceptable. But what the whole process has highlighted is an issue with engineers' qualifications and abilities, to be honest, and one which may change the way we look at things longer term and impact on what changes we see in this review round. During recent discussions on our online renewal course, which does not require a reassessment of practical elements, which DEFRA agreed was not necessary for somebody who has been assessed and can demonstrate they've been working in scope on the tools in recent months. But the discussion turned to anecdotal evidence from a couple of trainers that engineers on renewal courses had some poor practical skills. 2 centres who deliver City and Guilds 2079 courses said that the engineers they've had through their doors with an expiring CITB J11 qualification needed more practical training. But this, of course, highlights that all engineers need refresher training from time to time. I did my 2079 back in 2007, and I've actually had no formal practical training or assessment since then. I did have to prove my brazing skills when judging on Skillfridge a couple of years ago, but that's all. Other than that, I've had no practical assessment since 2007. But ridiculously, I could, if I wanted, go back on the tools now, despite having been off them completely for more than 5 years. And all completely legally because I hold an Evergreen City and Guilds certificate. And the phase down and the move towards more environmentally benign refrigerants is introducing increasing use of varying degrees of flammable refrigerants. As things stand, these systems are being installed by engineers with, according to those training assessors, inadequate practical skills. Now, that isn't good from an environmental nor increasingly a safety perspective. A major development in the future of F-gas has seen the proposal by AREA, the European Contractors Association, to widen the scope of the F-gas regulation to being not just a fluorinated greenhouse gases regulation, but a greenhouse gases regulation, the G-gas regulations perhaps. Very pleased to hear DEFRA recognising the importance of legislating for the certification on alternative refrigerants yesterday. They said they're considering all the options at the moment, and I have a follow-up meeting scheduled with DEFRA next week to discuss that in more detail, but very encouraging. Almost every refrigerant is a greenhouse gas to some extent. The venting of hydrocarbons is not environmentally friendly, despite what some would have you believe. R290 has a global warming potential 3 times that of CO2. Even CO2, of course, is a greenhouse gas, as we are frequently reminded by the climate scientists. So to pretend it's fine to vent these refrigerants is disingenuous at best. It's also plain dangerous. An example recently brought to my attention was a hydrocarbon system in a commercial kitchen where the engineer couldn't remove the under-counter unit from the kitchen to do the repair. So he simply vented the refrigerant into the kitchen and used the kitchen extraction canopy to remove the offending refrigerant from the area. It's a miracle the whole thing didn't go up, frankly. Never mind the plethora of ignition sources in a commercial kitchen itself. We've been recently discussing the very real dangers of grease buildup in kitchen extracts and the number of fires that this has already caused. The mind boggles as to what would have happened if a spark had caused the extract ducting to catch fire while the highly explosive R290 was being drawn through it. So we believe that the extension of the scope of F-gas to all greenhouse gases is not only sensible, it's essential to facilitate the transition towards lower GWP refrigerants. We're often reminded that the lack of properly skilled technicians is a barrier to use of alternative refrigerants. So why wouldn't we upskill the workforce to ensure that we do have that skill base? We are currently developing the ACRIB Flammables course for online delivery as a top-up 2-year F-gas qualifications, and the intention is to embed it in the F-gas course so that anybody taking the renewal course automatically gets the upskilling needed to work safely with flammable refrigerants going forward. From a CPD point of view, it makes sense, based on what the trainers at the centres I mentioned have said, that even if you hold a City and Guilds 2079 and don't need to renew it, it's a good idea that you do a renewal course as a refresher and get ahead of the game in having your knowledge of alternative refrigerants and their flammable properties certified, ready for whatever the next generation of F-gas throws at you, in fact. And with that, Andrew, I will hand back to you to bring the panel in.
Thank you very much, Graham.
Bang on time.
Yeah, I just looked across at the clock and you're 1 minute early. So this is, I'll have to fill that minute. No, I will fill that minute, but just by saying, so in general, encouraging the meeting yesterday.
Very encouraging. Yeah, they're saying all the right things, which is good to hear. I think we've all spent too many years arguing the case and not really getting anywhere. So very encouraging to hear them saying the right things. Yes.
Good stuff. Right, let's bring the panel in and we'll get the debate rolling. So at this point, I'm hoping to see some cameras appearing. So let me welcome Mark Hughes, Chemours, Peter Woods of Wolsey, and John Ormerod of AGAS. And for this session, loosely titled The View from the Ground, but I think the debate will be around what's going on, what might be going on, and probably a few opinions coming in, knowing you folk. Who are we going to start with? So what we tend to do, we ask you to just give a couple of minutes on how you're seeing the world. I think we'll start with John today. So brought John in specifically for his expertise on reclamation, but also everything else related to refrigerants. John, how's the world from your angle?
Thanks, Andrew. Look, I think it's exciting times. What came out of that DEFRA stakeholder workshop yesterday for me was this kind of growing convergence that's happening between all things F-gas and the Climate Change Act and this race to net zero. And I think that's bringing about this huge focus on driving down emissions across industry, and many large companies certainly are at the forefront of this, at looking at reducing their own emissions. For me, from a reclamation perspective, I think the circular economy and reclaimed refrigerant in particular has a huge part to play in this whole transition that industry is having to make in reducing its emissions. Reclaimed product has already been placed on the market once already, so it's largely been accounted for in terms of emissions. So any product that is being recovered and reclaimed and reused, I think, is an important part of this transition.
Great stuff. Thanks, John. We'll now go over to Mark next.
Hi. Yeah, no, honestly, looking at what was said yesterday, again, I was extremely encouraged. We've had our own, through FITA, through the Trade Association, our own, if you like, informal discussions with DEFRA regarding the review. And what comes across, again, is this whole thing around they're referring to other departments of government around carbon okay, F-gas obviously focuses very specifically on the specific part of, the contribution to global warming, but I think there's increasingly an understanding that it's not just about the gas, when that escapes from systems, but the amount of energy that's used in those systems. And I'm just trying to recall how many times heat pump was mentioned yesterday. It's just like the word that comes out every single time, and that is focusing, I think, everybody's mind around Europe. This increasing requirement to have, heat pumps in there, to have energy efficient or renewable energy, going into homes for heating and on the domestic side. So, super. And again, the proof of the pudding's in the eating. We'll see what comes out of the review, but if the focus goes down that route, then hopefully there won't be any ill-considered changes or bans that come out of this. I think there was a comment made that we have to trade with Europe, so that therefore we can't diverge too far, because obviously that would make us unable to be able to properly trade with the rest of Europe. So again, hopefully that will hold the horses back a little bit. But there is a chance, I think, to improve the way that we work, and Graham's comment there around the training, raising the bar on training and getting more engineers to be able to use a wider range of refrigerants safely, I think is an absolute must. And I was encouraged, but by some of the words that were used, but we'll see what happens.
We'll come to training and hydrocarbons in a minute, because Graham's already set a few hairs racing with his earlier comments. He won't be surprised to hear. But first of all, I'm going to go to Peter and see what we always characterize you as the middleman, but what's the view from the wholesaler?
Right. Good morning. I'd like to talk with respect to the wholesalers in general. I think my personal views are that A2Ls are coming, and we should be proactive with A2Ls. I think that COVID has put us back quite considerably. I would say that we've lost probably 10 to 12 months, and I would have liked to see take up of A2Ls a lot earlier. And the projection now is that we're not really going to see the real take up until the early part of next year, if not the second half of next year. The good news is that the product availability is coming through. We've got a lot of products coming onto the market from the likes of Danfoss, Tecumseh and Emerson's. A lot of the LT systems are yet to be made available to us, but certainly small packaged equipment will be covered very readily within the next 12 months. And the challenges that we're going to see on that with regards to F-gas, I personally feel there's a lot of ignorance still in the industry on how to apply the A2Ls safely. And I think there is a really big case for more training with the contractor base and the understanding that they require to carry out this work. We have had some early adopters. We've done some work with various companies, but it's not at the level that we really should be seeing at this time. So the product's there, the expertise is there, people can find it, the regulations are very clear, there's a lot of documentation available through the industry, the likes of FITA and BISRIA, etc. And I feel that the industry really needs to start to move itself forward and start to take up these new refrigerants, because it's a juggernaut that's coming, and unless you're prepared for it, you're going to get run over. It may be a bit of a cliche analogy, but you need to be prepared. That's my take on the industry at the moment.
Thanks, Peter. I'm glad to hear that everybody's saying a similar kind of thing. It would be terrible to have complete controversy right at the beginning. But on that note, so you're being taken the task a little bit over your comments on hydrocarbons, Graham. Not
surprisingly.
I'll read some of them out. Extreme views, Graham. R290 is flammable, not highly explosive. And then ...
Okay.
Come on.
Okay, so it's highly flammable then.
Okay.
It would still have been a major disaster if that kitchen extract had caught fire, as they frequently do when there was a charge of R290 going through it. It may not have been explosive, but it still would have been a disaster. And coupled with the grease in that canopy, let's not forget, would have been a major incident.
Okay. I mean, what this highlights, everything that we've said so far, is there's a feeling that we need to get the training right, we need to get the standards right.
But we need to raise awareness, because we still have a contractor base that largely does not understand the dangers that are inherent in working with flammable refrigerants. Now, we have the 2Ls, which are very, very hard to ignite, so that's fine. But without that level of training or an upskilling in the contractor base, what we have a danger of is, because we've been quite deliberately highlighting the fact that 2Ls are actually very, pretty safe to actually handle, there's a danger that some of these contractors then think, oh, that's fine, flammable gases aren't really a danger. And there's a huge difference between working with R32 and working with R290. So it's all about raising that awareness and getting that workforce upskilled and certified as actually knowing what they're doing and what they're handling.
Okay, but just for the record, I'm going to answer it live and need to read it out. From the training community, the guidance is very clear: venting of hydrocarbons up to 150 grams and only outside in free air. Inside you recover. I mean, I think it probably underlines that we need to push this through to the contracting community. And how do we do that, I guess, is the next question. Anybody got any views on that? Don't point everybody back to Visa, Graham. You've already done quite a long advert this morning. But
other training courses are
there are plenty of other training
available.
Yeah, and we can point you to those. And there are those on the call today that have done plenty of training that can speak for themselves.
I think
well.
I mean, how do we get that out to the wider community and get this upskilling done? It's not going to happen without the alternative refrigerants and flammable gases being mandated as being certified in the same way that the HFCs are. This is what the problem is. We've been hearing from the European Commission for years that there's a barrier to the uptaking of alternative refrigerants because of a lack of skilled personnel. We've done surveys through ARIA of the entire European contracting community, and the difference since the last F-gas review has been negligible in the number of engineers who have actually taken the training to do the flammables. In the UK, we're actually probably ahead of the game, but it's still quite a small percentage of UK refrigeration air conditioning engineers who have actually done any kind of upskilling course with flammable refrigerants. It is growing. As I say, I think we're probably ahead of the game in European terms, but there's still quite a small number who have actually done that.
It's almost like you've anticipated a question which has just come in, which is there a big difference between what the UK is doing and what Europe is doing? I suppose we should also say, for the record, there's some very good work going on throughout the world at the moment with training the trainers. We're reporting on that all the time. They've just the guys have just come back from a hybrid of virtual and practical training in Nigeria, I believe it is. But certainly the folk at Central Galileo are working through the African countries together with the UN. So this is a global necessity, isn't it, to bring engineers up to speed?
It absolutely is. I mean, I think that one of the messages that I heard from, I think, 3 different members of staff at DEFRA yesterday on the workshop was that they kept talking about it being a European market, and it's not a European market. We're a global market we work in. The manufacturers are trying to harmonize products globally as much as possible, because clearly it makes sense from a manufacturing point of view. It cuts down manufacturing costs when you're producing the same kit globally, more or less the same kit. But I identified that 10 years ago now, that was a severe issue, that, you know, we're trying to at that time put flammable refrigerants onto a skilled and certified market that haven't had the upskilling and handling flammable refrigerants. And yet, because of the global context of the market, we're actually potentially going to be then putting those flammable refrigerants into markets like Africa, where the engineers have had, some of them have had no formal training whatsoever. And what we found, because as you know, I kind of got that whole UNEP refrigerant driver's license project started deliberately to try and produce some kind of level of competence globally to the Article 5 UN countries. And what we found when we've gone out to do the train the trainer sessions in Rwanda and in Trinidad and Tobago and all these kind of places, that we have a situation where we have engineers working in the industry in the globe who some of them have never even been to school. And the concept of actually delivering some kind of training course and then testing them with an exam was just anathema to them. And what we found, that actually the trainers in one of the countries, and I won't name them to save their blushes, but in one of the countries, all 17 trainers failed the exam. That's not the engineers, that's the people who are training the engineers who failed the exam. That's quite worrying to think that we're going to put hydrocarbon refrigerants into their hands when they have no formal level of qualification at all. So that's a massive hurdle that we're having to try and overcome through the UN project that I'm working on.
Thanks, Graham. Some very interesting comments coming in. So we've got contractors out there, we've got engineers out there calling in. It makes it sound like a phone in, calling in. And one of the comments is the contractors have a duty of care. They must ensure that their employers are fully trained for any refrigerants they work with. So we got that on the one hand coming from a contractor. From another engineer, they believe there's a large void between what the clear guidance that industry experts are saying on here, that's you guys, and the general practitioners in the field. How do we bridge this gap? And I guess things like this are a good start, but it's also part of it's getting the education message across, the info across, isn't it, in the first place? Another comment is coming in that the A2Ls, if you're installing A2Ls, you need to comply with the Pressure Equipment Directive. And does everybody know about that who's out in the field? So it's these kind of questions, isn't it? Peter, I reckon that's something where you could be, your middleman status could be quite useful here, I think. You're on mute, by the way, so
yeah, sorry about that.
it's all right.
Just different buttons, different system. Yeah, I think PED is something that there's a lot of ignorance about. Certainly with A2Ls, we drop into a different group of gases. So if you look at the DESIR regulations and you look at the zones, etc., and the PED specifically states the maximum size receiver category that is allowed. And when you look at it, well, I've done some preliminary work on it, and others have as well. You're dropping into category 2 and category 3 far quicker than you would do with an HFC. And the issues there are that you would need a notified body. If you're operating or putting systems together over category 2, then you're obliged under the law to have a notified body. Now, this notified body will assess your installation. He won't do every single installation, but he will come out and do a number of installations over the year, and they will certify that you have done the installation safely to the regulations and that you have got a design assessment. So you need to do a risk assessment and a design assessment that is signed off by your notified body. So I would say that 80% of the small and single contractors out there would not have a clue with regards to their requirements under the law for PED. And that is a big worry, because we don't want people putting stuff in that's not safe. You need to carry out a proper pressure test on these systems, particularly with A2Ls, because you don't want a leak in that room. You've also got to take into account the lower level of flammability of the gas, the regulations stating how much gas you can put into the system given the volume of the conditioned space. So there's a whole raft of legislation that is covered by EN 378 and DESIR. And there's some very good guides out there from FITA that contractors need to be aware of.
Yeah, there's clearly a disconnect, isn't there, about regulation and risk and this kind of thing, and you can never do too much to put the word out. I was racking my brains. Is it IOR or is it BRA who put out a generic risk assessment for Ministry?
I think it was the IOR.
Yeah, so it's about risk. Sorry, Mark.
FITA have done one as well, and actually it's work in progress. It's something I was going to mention. Actually, it's we're bringing in consultants through FITA to basically bring in best practice.
I think that's the one you're after.
There you go.
Yeah,
got it to hand.
Yeah, but I think the point is that guidance is being amended all the time as we learn more. To make it more amenable to the to the workforce that's out there. And I think one of the things that's come to mind going through that is much of what is actually being delivered was already there. It was already needed with the existing refrigerants. It just wasn't being done. It's just that when you bring in this thing of an extra hazard of a level of flammability, obviously with the 2Ls it being a low flammability, but even so, it actually focuses, someone and say, oh, I've got a hazard here like flammability, but you always were dealing with a pressurized gas. So you had to do PD and risk assessments. All this stuff was already required. It just wasn't necessarily being followed because of that, because there wasn't additional hazard of flammability. So that's very much come to mind. And I'd say that's the thing about getting the skills right in the contractor base. And as Peter said, there are some early adopters. There's going to be some real stars out there that really move quickly, do things safely, pick up a lot of the work that's going to be required. The others will have to come, it's 80-20, I guess. The others will have to come on board. But there is the training's out there, it's available for people to go through. So yeah, it's not that difficult.
I'm just going to throw in at the moment another comment, which is worth bearing in mind, of course, and that is that all refrigerants have risks, and so they of one kind or another, so they all need managing and risk assessment. Also, I should throw in, actually, because this is linked. The BRA have just updated their guidance for brazing. So, and again, this is very much emphasising the competence of the engineer, because if you don't keep the refrigerants in, you're causing more of a problem. You know, it's the age-old adage, which is difficult to say at this time of the morning, of if it doesn't leak, you don't have, you know, the global warming potential is only potential, it's not going anywhere. So it's about back to fundamentals, isn't it? And we would do well when we're getting all excited about the boom in natural refrigerants, the A2Ls coming, that we should be talking about fundamental principles as well, starting from the right place, keeping the refrigerant in. I was going to move on because we can't have a discussion at F-gas without a little bit of a discussion around availability. Peter's touched on it, but John's sitting there with the data at his fingertips. Have the bans had a noticeable effect on the way refrigerants coming in and out, or Brexit had a noticeable effect, John?
Brexit's had some challenges, particularly related to Northern Ireland, because obviously with Northern Ireland remaining within the EU F-gas system, that's created a bit of friction in how the Northern Irish market is serviced. In Great Britain itself, since January, I'm not aware of any supply issues at this stage, but having said that, let's remember we're coming out of lockdown, and I take what some of the other panelists have said, is that the pandemic has really knocked activity in the sector considerably over the last 12 to 14 months, and almost stopped any retrofit activity and adoption of some of the newer refrigerants. So we might be in a slightly misleading period where we're not quite sure what the underlying situation is in the market.
Mm-hmm. Okay, what about reclaimed refrigerant? Let's tackle that, because in some ways that is, I won't say overlooked, but I think it's underemphasized.
Yes.
You know, it's important to include this. It's a key part of reaching the quota one, because it is exempt from quota.
Yes, I would agree with that. I think it's an under-recognized part of this whole equation of moving towards a net zero situation. We have older refrigerants out there that are no longer going to be used in any form, even for servicing equipment, because the equipment's moved on over the years. But those refrigerants are recoverable and can be taken apart, because most of them are blends, and they can be taken apart and various components repurposed into current generation refrigerants. So there's a lot going on there, and I think it's an important area that we need to just keep raising as a focus area for contractors, to recover the refrigerant, get it back to reclaimers, because it can be put back into the market, and that then generally helps availability overall. On the topic of flammable refrigerants, that's creating its own headaches in the reclamation industry, because we now need different recovery cylinders for flammable products, and there's some technical reasons around why we need to do that, but more importantly, mixing the flammables with the HFC refrigerants gives every reclaimer a complete nightmare in terms of how to deal with those mixtures. Many of them form azeotropes and therefore can't be separated and repurposed back into usable refrigerants. So keeping flammables completely separate is critical.
So again, that comes down to education at the contractor level, information provision, making sure everybody's following the rules. Part of the challenge of doing a virtual question time is you folk out there, you can type very quickly, probably type quicker than you can even say it sometimes. So as I'm listening to the answers, we're being variously castigated, corrected, and all those kind of things. So I'm going to step back a couple of minutes into some of the previous conversations for the record. So comments come in that pressure equipment directive has been a legal requirement since the 90s, so compliance has also been required since then. And a reminder that this is policed by the Health and Safety Executive, so ignore it at your peril. There you go. That's a good message to put in there. And again, reference to braze joints. So the contractors are saying actually the braze joints is not the biggest issue with leaks at the moment. It's mechanical leakage. That's an issue. So maybe that's something for BRA to work on. Graham's coming back to that, which will allow me to move a few of these questions out of the inbox. Go on then, Graham.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, pressure equipment directive. Absolutely, it's been around for years. I think as an industry, we've all known it's been very, very woefully policed. Like an awful lot of the regulations, the policing is lacking. So that's why people haven't been paying attention to it, because there's been very, very little compliance. The major thing that's going to drive the change in the way we operate in the next few years is all of the flack that's come out of the post-Grenfell, post-Dame Judith Hackett's report about the golden thread of competence that's going to run right through the construction industry. Now, it's maybe not something that affects the commercial refrigeration sector as much, or they don't see it as affecting them as much. It's certainly going to affect the building services side of the industry, the heat pumps, the air conditioning units. But I think realistically, it will impact quite severely on the commercial refrigeration sector as well in time. And what it means is that, we have this new building safety regulator that's being appointed by the HSE. So we have an organization that's going to be policing the safer buildings going forward, that has that HSE backing. So whoever it was that pointed that out about the HSE policing, it's absolutely spot on, and that is really, really crucial to why I think this is going to become better policed in future. And again, it's why we have to have this continuous professional development and refresher training and things, because that competence golden thread is going to have to be evidenced by everybody in any sector, not just ours. So that's really, really critical going forward. But I think, as always, compliance levels are poor because of the level of policing.
I think it's worth saying that the C words, compliance and competence very much part of the Hackett regime going forward, and this will be it's proof. Being able to prove your competence is going to be a key issue for regulators. On which note, someone has suggested that why, or has asked the sort of rhetorical question, why are so few managers in refrigeration F-gas qualified? Is there a place for F-gas management, a manager's F-gas qualification is the question. What do you think to that?
You said you had to go at me for advertising BESA training earlier, but we have actually got an F-gas awareness course for managers under development right now. It'll probably be live in about 2 weeks' time, hopefully. We've been working on that for a while, because what became really evident when I was doing audits of companies was that we have service managers and people who are responsible for teams of engineers who are actually not from the sector themselves. So they don't have any qualifications. They had no formal training or competency in the sector, and yet they were being asked to manage a team of 30 engineers. So a lot of those managers would come to the seminars that I used to do when we used to be able to travel around the country and do face-to-face seminars. Remember those good old days? And we used to get a lot of service managers coming to them because they wanted to get some kind of background to what F-gas is about, what they need to do, what they need to make sure their engineers are doing. So yeah, we've been developing, it's actually a variation on the actual F-gas course, but it's a little bit less technical, and it obviously doesn't have the exam at the end. But yeah, I don't know who asked that. Maybe it was somebody from BESA Academy trying to get me to plug the course. I don't know.
I'm not going to let you plug it anymore without putting ads in the paper. Right. The heat pump. We've got 5 minutes. 5 minutes to go. I know it's passed so quickly, isn't it? Heat pumps are going to be big in terms of, as we've said, the heating industry is getting very excited about. The heating industry have just discovered the heat pump 10 years after we've been banging on about it. I'm being disingenuous, but I really do think that people haven't realised in a large scale about the fact that it's got refrigerant in it, and that's subject to regulation. Do you see this getting more complicated, or is it going to be straightforward? Mark, have you got a view on that? You've been looking at heat pumps, I'm sure, as from your point of view.
Yeah, I mean today, a lot of heat pumps are using 410A, higher GWP. Once you take sort of 404 out of the equation, so that. I have a heat pump installed. I had one installed last year. It's got 410A in there. It works fantastically, whatever. But it does have, a fairly high GWP HFC in there. So what do you use instead? You have to go to lower GWP. Well, we've got our Option range, absolutely suitable with that. We're working with lots of manufacturers around the place. I'll be alluding to that later. But also you can use hydrocarbons in there as well. But obviously then, you've got your charge size limitations, and you've got again safety issues. I don't think we're ready for it yet. And again, the number of engineers required to do, to meet the sort of targets that they're talking about in terms of number of, is it 600,000 installs? There was a number I heard.
600,000 a year, yeah.
I mean, this is just, you can't, your average plumber. Sticking if it's a hermetic system, like a monoblock and whatever, then that's possible. But to get the best out of them, you often have if you like the gas pot also inside the house, recovering heat from the house as well to get the best out of it, because we're going to be talking about super efficiencies. With that, there's some real concerns about what technologies are the best to be used. So I think we've got it from the technology side is right. We've got A2Ls in heat pump technology. We've got a big campaign actually running at the moment with that, and you will see more of our products coming through in the heat pumps. But on the other side, we've got to have an installer base that can use whatever the technology is, whether it be hydrocarbons, whether it be A2Ls. And also, obviously, installing even the 410A units effectively, they're only as good as the install in terms of the efficiency that you get. And you hear a lot of issues with people not really understanding the controls. So there's a lot of work to do there. But it's today. I mean, this is here. I mean, this is going to happen right now with the targets that are being set. So great challenge, and actually fantastic injection, I think, of work into the industry, but not enough people ready to do it.
I was going to say that is, okay, I'll come to you in a sec, Peter. Just to flag up that as we sit across both heating and cooling here with H&B as well, Sister Magazine, it is clear that the refrigeration industry's expertise will be useful, if not essential, to the guys that are suddenly faced with all heating installations all over the place. So training companies, wholesalers, etc. There, I think we've often in the past talked about, well, we can offer our expertise into the heating sector, but this is very much reality now. So opportunities, I think, for making heat pumps for some, I think we'll find, and sort of it. But I guess the warning is for those of us who work across both sectors. Graham can testify to this now. They're very different ways of working, very different worlds. So be prepared that the heating installer community is very different to the fridge contractor. So don't assume anything. Sorry, Peter, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say that it does frighten me that we are going to get a raft of gas engineers that are going to go on to a 5-day course and suddenly become qualified refrigeration engineers. Graham might have some take on that, but we're going to get a lot of people that are going to have their F-gas, and they then are going to be playing around with systems that they don't understand, and when we get a raft of people coming into the industry, it's going to bring things down. We're going to get incidents with these heat pumps. I'm hoping that a lot of the stuff is going to be monoblock. It's going to be outside, so the risk is low to the general public. But there isn't the skill set out there. There's not enough fridge engineers in this country to cover the heat pumps when they come through. And we really need to upskill these people, and there needs to be a much better training course. You can't just go out and work on fridge when you've just had a 5-day course. You need a lot more experience. You need an NVQ level 2 minimum to do this sort of work. And that's my concern. I'm slightly frightened that we're going to have people out there that are going to be basically cowboys running into equipment like this, and they're going to cause us a bad name across the industry.
That's a
Can I just add,
yeah.
because Peter's absolutely spot on. We don't need to have another very simple course to have people suddenly call themselves refrigeration engineers. It's just it's complete nonsense. I mean, we've been quite clear, and I think the Heat Pump Association course that's being developed at the moment, and we've been quite clear with the course that we've done, that it's about upskilling. It's really about upskilling heating engineers to actually understand the basic terminology. As Mark said, there's a lot of incidents where the efficiencies haven't been recognized because the controls aren't set right, and silly things like that. And that's because there's a basic lack of knowledge of how renewable heating works among the heating engineer community. So these courses, I think, that are available just now are about upskilling the heating engineers so they understand the technology, so that they can actually apply monoblocks in a more efficient way and install them, design them properly. And certainly, we're quite clear that it doesn't in any way qualify you with an F-gas qualification. But even the F-gas qualification isn't sufficient for making somebody a refrigeration engineer. All it does is demonstrate that you understand the environmental impacts of the refrigerants. That's all. As you say, Peter, you need to have 2 years minimum experience, I would say, before you could be any kind of engineer.
Again, it's underlining competence, not just understanding. It's competence. So we are reaching the end of our time. I'm going to do the classic finish off of getting you to add in your one sentence to the industry. But one more thing to tackle for John just before we go. Callers saying that they're noticing more. I'm going to put in quotes, reclaimed refrigerant, which is in fact just recovered refrigerant, but it's been offered around. Is this a growing issue, ensuring that reclaimed is properly reclaimed? Are you seeing this from?
Yes, I would agree that it's a growing issue, and I think the wording of the F-gas regulation currently really doesn't help matters here. I mean, if you think about motor cars, you wouldn't want your garage to recover the oil from the used oil from your system and use it on somebody else's car. And essentially, that's what's going on with the recycled refrigerant. There's no real regulation in place about what precisely turns it into recycled refrigerant. It's all pretty vague. It's a basic cleaning process is how it is described in the regulation. And I think that allows this loophole for unscrupulous contractors to drive a cart and horses through it and do what they like and pass refrigerant off as something it's actually not. I think from an operator perspective, you'd really want to know exactly where that refrigerant is coming from. And virgin refrigerant, it meets a particular specification. Reclaimed refrigerant in exactly the same way meets a specification and has an auditable trail of where it's come from and how it's been cleaned up and exactly what it is. With recycled refrigerant, you don't have any of that. You're relying on somebody telling you that it's been cleaned when it might not have been.
Thank you, John. Right, we're down to that one. What's the one sentence takeaway for the industry? I'm going to start with Peter on this. One sentence takeaway from today. This is your last chance to speak, basically.
Be prepared.
Be prepared. Okay, good. That's a very short sentence. Well done. Graham.
Yeah, the F-gas regulations are going to demand that you are upskilled. So the competence issue is key.
Great. At this point, I'm just going to interject that the Heat Pump Association will be launching a course. This is slightly what you said, for existing heating engineers, which focuses on monoblocks to install split systems, the engineer should, of course, need to be F-gas certified. I think we're going to have to be making that clear as a sector about that difference as time goes on. John, what's your one sentence?
Exciting times ahead, and I think the speed of change is going to surprise many.
Okay, good. This is a good degree of excitement around. Mark, then.
Just to remind everybody that, you know, we now the quota system, the phase down, it's not gone away. It's now enshrined in UK law, and the walls are coming in. So you know, we expect that to be policed much better in the UK potentially than it was in the EU. And so therefore everything we've been talking about here, getting ready for that, it hasn't gone away. COVID has put it back potentially in terms of people's focus, but it hasn't gone away. And climate change obviously is still something that needs to be looked at as an intrinsic part of these changes.
I think very much this upskilling is a big theme. The audience is saying, can we get investment into apprentices for the fridge industry, because we won't be able to cope with the volume required when heat pumps come in. These are all good questions. I think we're going to have a heat pump question time, aren't we? Who's going to sponsor that then? Well, we'll just leave that one out in the ether. We're 6 minutes behind. We have to move on. So thanks to the panel one. And I'm delighted to welcome F-gas guru number 2 into the arena. We've been doing this, I think, now for over 10 years, Ray.
Indeed.
And you're looking younger and I'm not. So what does that tell you about the world of F-gas? I nearly said without further ado again, but I'm on that penalty. So please tell us your view from the corridors of Europe and beyond these days.
Okay, I think the longevity bit is more to do with ammonia. I've got this feeling that breathing ammonia fumes adds years to your life, whereas fluorinated gases don't get to places that other gases reach.
Interesting concept. Yeah, that'll start the question and answer session, won't it?
Indeed. Okay, I hope that. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, we're on screen. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Well, in the next 15 minutes, I'm just going to take a whiz through a number of bits and pieces. It's a pleasure to be here again this year, and good morning to everybody. What I'm going to cover is sort of. Last time we had a question time was about a year ago, so a few quick catch-ups on what's happened since then, and then really most of my talk is a bit of crystal ball gazing about what is likely to happen over the next few years. So first of all, what has changed? I mean, of course, we've had a very big quota cut in January of this year. The EU quota and the UK, of course, is the same level of quota at the moment. They run in these 3-year cycles. And we've just had a cut, a 55% cut from the amount that we were allowed to use in 2015, which you know, really shows how fast Europe is moving. Interestingly, we don't seem to have had that kind of price panic that happened on the previous cut, which was January 2018, when we saw these enormous price rises in refrigerant. Now, whether COVID has got something to do with that or illegal imports is very hard to judge, but the market seems to have transitioned into 2021 reasonably smoothly. The market itself is just continuing at a pretty good pace, albeit, as some of the previous panels said, slowed a little bit by COVID, with the introduction of lower GWP refrigerants. Definitely lots of activity in the A2L arena in particular, and from what I can judge, a significant growth of interest in reclaimed and recycled refrigerants, and I totally take on board John's comments a few minutes ago that recycled are very much second best and should be avoided where possible, that the reclaim route is the right way to go. What else has happened in the last 12 months is that the process of evaluating the EU F-gas regulation is well underway, and in parallel with the EU doing things, DEFRA in the UK are doing it as well, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. And then on the international scene, we've had another about 30 odd ratifications of Kigali in the last 12 months. So we're up to 120 of the 197 countries that will eventually, I hope, ratify. We've also, and this is perhaps the most important bit, had, albeit they haven't ratified yet, commitments from the US and indeed from China. And that's going to make a big difference to the international scene. In the EU and therefore in the UK, what are the next steps under the current regulation? The next cut in quota is in another 3 years' time, well, 2.5 years' time, 2024. That will be a 69% cut from the baseline. And an even bigger cut if you take into account pre-charged equipment imports, which I'll again touch upon that briefly in a second. So we need to be ready for that cut. We need to continue the momentum. There's not a lot more in the current regulation apart from that, from the cuts in quota. There are 4 product bans that are not yet in place. So next year, there's a couple of really quite important bans in the refrigeration space, particularly so the hermetically sealed refrigeration for commercial use is basically you know, all the standalone integral type equipment, which at the moment could use a refrigerant with a GWP under 2,500. That will drop to, they must be less than 150. And it will encourage, of course, the uptake of hydrocarbons, I would say, in particular, in the very small sealed systems, and possibly some A2Ls as well. And then the multi-pack refrigeration systems, actually, I apologize, that should say greater than 40 kilowatts, not 40 kilograms, with 40 kilowatts of cooling, again, that needs a GWP under 150 from next year. I stress again, this is commercial use. It's not for the industrial application. No particular logic for that. It's just that's what the rules are. The next ban is in the insulation foam sector in 2023. So effectively, that means the whole of the foams market won't use HFCs anymore for manufacturing of new foams, because XPS foam is already banned in 2020. And finally, the split air conditioning ban with a GWP threshold of 750 for small split air conditioners. But the point to make there is actually most of that market has already made the transition by 2021. So there's no particular stress to get to a complete switch by 2025. So that's coming up in the near future. Just a reminder of some of these phase down steps. I tend to include the pre-charged imports into the equation because the back in the baseline period, we didn't account for this red area here, and we've estimated that to be about another just over 10% of the total market. So you really need to measure cuts from that higher level. Hence, our current cut this year is in reality a 60% cut, and then this 2024 cut becomes a 72% cut. So Europe has really made a massive move already, and we need to just keep going. The review will be uppermost in many people's minds during the next 6 months or so. So what's happening under the review? The OCO Research are leading a study. They're the same company that did a study back in 2009 for the Commission. There was a big stakeholder meeting earlier this month with over 350 people, of course, a virtual meeting. And I believe there was about 200 people at yesterday's DEFRA meeting, which is fantastic, showing the interest in what's going on. The EU in general is pushing forward rapidly on all climate change issues with very tough 2030 targets and net zero by 2050. So what that's doing is putting pressure on our regulators. So we've also got the fact that Kigali by 2034 moves ahead of the current F-gas regulation. So harmonization will be needed. So I would fully expect that the F-gas rules are going to be tightened. We're probably going to get more, well, almost definitely we'll get more quota cuts post 2030. And I don't think they can adjust the 2024 cut, but they could easily decide to propose a bigger cut in 2027. There'll be, I'm sure, some product bans, and there's lots of talk about what can we do to reduce the risk of illegal trade and etc. Quite interesting to note the way that the use of F-gases have changed over the last years. That in 2018, RAC HP was 76% of the market, and the total market was, I'll call it size 100. By 2030, the market will have reduced to 45, and by 2035, I predict the market will have reduced to about 30. This is all in terms of tons of CO2 equivalent. But note the difference in the shape and the fact that the RAC HP market is getting a smaller proportion of the overall total, albeit it's still the dominant bit. I expect even after the regulation finishes in 2030 with a cut, that actually the market will shrink further after 2030 without a change to the regulation. That in 2035, the three key sectors are our sector, RAC HP, plus MDIs, that's metered dose inhalers, medical inhalers, plus high voltage switchgear that uses sulfur hexafluoride. And it's those three parts of the market that you would expect policymakers to focus on, because going for the rest has diminishing returns. So it just sort of points to where things are going to happen in the next few years. There's a whole stack of proposals, I'm not going to dwell on these, that were presented in the stakeholder presentation on May the 6th. Removal of certain exemptions, etc. And you can easily read about these, I'm sure, from the European Commission notes that were published. But these are all just proposals. So what's going to happen going forward? Certainly, absolutely nothing has been decided. There's proposals that are on the table. Some of the proposals you'll have even read today in certain parts of the press that said that some of the proposals are very extreme, and the European industry bodies have got together and said that the OCO research study is poor at this stage. Nothing is decided. They will publish results late this year, and what is expected that the European Commission will make proposals at exactly the same time. So late 2021, I think we'll see a load of proposals that have been justified and with economic impact assessments and things like that. There'll then be a period of negotiation between the Commission, the Parliament, the Council of Ministers who represent the member states. In the past, that would have taken at least 2 years. I think it'll be quicker this time because of the whole concern over climate change. So a new regulation is possible next year, end of 2022, more likely sometime in 2023. Kigali Amendment, what's been going on the international scene? As I've already said, 120 countries have ratified. Interestingly, Russia ratified earlier last year. What's awful is that some very big countries, including the USA, China, India, Brazil, have not ratified, not yet. As slightly good news, is that America and China have both made commitments to ratify, which is very important. We've got cuts starting in developed countries already, and the baseline period is currently underway for most Article 5 developing countries. A reminder that the blue line is the European phase down, whereas the red line is the Kigali phase down that applies to developed countries, developing countries away further in the future. So the European phase down is considerably more challenging than Kigali until we get to 2034, when the two lines cross each other. And I think Kigali has generally had a positive impact for the industry because it adds momentum to the global point. And as Graham said, the global market is very, very important. Clearly, COVID has slowed things down. We haven't had any face-to-face meetings in the last year, and we won't have this summer either. We might have by November, but even that isn't certain. And that is slowing a few things down. Change of administration in the US is really positive. They've done stuff, and they've had a joint meeting with China and made a declaration that both are going to ratify. And I think once China does, then probably India will follow suit, which will be very helpful. As a general conclusion, good progress in Europe will support progress under Kigali. We're leading the way, and we should be very proud of that, I think. Brexit, UK has adopted all the F-gas regulation rules. We have the quota system in place. We have these rather difficult arrangements with Northern Ireland that Graham's alluded to. We are undertaking an independent evaluation of the regulation. Like Europe, UK has also published very strong generic climate goals. And the fact that we're hosting COP26 means that we want to be seen to be doing the best possible to set an example, I think is fair to say. So that probably means that the UK is going to push just as hard as the EU. Now, it's possible that what the UK decides to do will not be identical to what the EU does, although I think as much harmonization as possible would be useful to help us all. But I certainly don't think that the UK will do anything other than be just as tough over the next year in thinking about changes to the F-gas regulation. So my final comments, we seem to have moved into the next step of phase down rather smoothly, although is it a false impression? I don't know, but currently things are going okay. The reviews are underway. Don't expect anything other than an increase of ambition. The question is by how much, I think. The global phase down is underway. It's been slowed by COVID, but the fact that the US is back involved is, of course, a very positive thing. And that's it from me. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Ray. Ray will be coming to the panel, of course, in a minute, but as we're a little bit behind, I'll throw straight over to Mark Hughes because he's the one under most pressure to keep to time. And he's disappeared now, which just hasn't helped. Mark Hughes of Chemours will now tell us all about refrigerants ready now for the future, and a very jaunty little shelf-sized Mark Hughes on the slide there. Over to you, Mark.
on the shelf. So I take it from those comments, Andrew, that you can see my presentation. So
I can see your presentation.
Okie dokie. Okay. So yeah, I'm Mark Hughes. I'm working with Chemours. We're sponsoring this event today, and we have for a number of years now. And it's great to be able to do this, and I do look forward to doing it face to face at some future point. So you know, I work for Chemours Thermal and Specialized Solutions, as we are now called, and I just wanted to, you know, just say just a few words by that new name. We were fluorochemicals. So instead of talking about what it is that we sell and develop, it's about what we provide in terms of solutions. So it's all about heating and cooling, if you like, thermal energy in one way or another. So that is very much our focus. The discussion around heat pumps, you know, very much brings us into that area, and I say that will be mentioned as part of the solutions that we're putting forward with our new products. I think Peter said in one of his summaries it was about be prepared, you know, get ready, and you know, over the next few years. You know, not everything, but a lot of the new refrigeration systems to be able to meet the phase down will either be in some way explosive, that could be high pressure, that could be highly flammable, too explosive in certain situations, toxic, or flammable to some degree. I'll be talking a little bit more about the lower flammable products, which are the key products that we're putting forward. So, you know, you're going to have to stand up to and do something with using one of those hazards there to some degree. These are the products that we have, you know, in the portfolio. They're in the blue and the green areas. You know, 404A basically is gone. We talked a little bit about 410A. That's, you know, a key product for heat pumps today. High GWP, but as we phase down, as we go down that list from the red to the green, you will see we go through the transition, the stuff that John's already talked about in terms of, you know, recovering and reclaiming 404A and products like that. That's been made possible by using our products like XP40 and XP44, 449A, 452A. But even they are too high in GWP nowadays. You know, we've got XP10 out there as a 134A replacement. There's obviously R32 coming through. It's not an HFO blend, it's an HFC, but with a good low GWP at this time as an interim. And then we've got the products in green, which I'm going to focus on more, and that's our XL range in the Optimum range with the different R numbers, mainly R454. So again, I won't dwell on this for too long because Peter's already mentioned the fact that we've got a lot of equipment out there now, you know, too many to really list or go through. Many of those components are available for A2L and specifically named with our Option XL blends available from the OEMs as compressors, valves, and you know, all that type of equipment. But also the key thing is commercially available through the wholesale network. So you can get most of what you need for most of the applications out there. It's not all available yet, particularly on the low temperature side, but it's coming. And during this year, I'm sure we'll have the full range available. So that's one of the key messages there. One of the key differences probably from when we did this discussion last year is that the equipment is out there and available. So get on and use it is the message. So as you know, air conditioning and heat pumps. You know, in air conditioning, we know that R32 has made a lot of inroads in this area, even though its GWP is not the lowest, but it's like a sort of like low-hanging fruit. So it's a relatively easy one to put into place. And the small splits are dominated by that, even ahead of the F-gas bans that are coming later in this decade. Chillers very much moved already to products like XL41 or 454B. and we're seeing more and more of those coming into operation. And then heat pumps, we spoke a lot about today. That large growth predicted in the UK. Our products, our A2L products, are ideally suited to that and avoid the need for using things like hydrocarbons, which, obviously have that higher degree of flammability. And we are beginning to see products with XL20 454C come in and being used already. On refrigeration, the two key products there are 454C and 454A, depending on the application. 454C more is the less than 150 GWP, so particularly meets that band that's coming in a couple of next year. In fact, in 2022, 454A more for non-retail, so industrial sorts of applications, cold stores. That's that type of application. And we're standing up against products like CO2 and propane, and I'll say a little bit more about that later. So, we've got widespread adoption of these products around the place. You'll be hearing later from Brian Churchill from Asda, from Luke Ollie from Central England Co-op, two key retailers that have really bitten the bullet and made the change. But there's numerous other examples, and specifically in the cold store arena, where products like XL40 and XL20 are eminently suitable to be used. The N37A allows you to use specific charge sizes, which are very well suited to those types of applications. Numerous of those systems have now been installed. Again, I'm not getting into a lot of detail today, but we've got loads of case studies now for people to work through for their own applications. So why should I choose A2L refrigerants? Well, there's lots of different reasons why we would. And obviously cost is always a big one. Energy efficiency now, as we start to look to this net zero, is become even more in focus, and I think will be a key part of what people consider now when they're looking at refrigeration, particularly when you look against CO2, which in many cases is not the best option in terms of energy efficiency. The other thing is, we're always developing the value proposition that we have for the Opteon products, the Opteon XL products, particularly things like heat recovery is something that is a key feature that we're starting to emphasize now. You can put heat recovery, so you can do heating and cooling with the Opteon XL products. So that's important. And then the rest of it go really basically those table stakes: reliability, safety, and environmental sustainability. And the key thing that we see is it's been held back by COVID. It's been held back by the potentially the lack of investment that's going out there for end users in these uncertain times. But that system complexity is low when you're looking at A2L products, and that should help to speed up the transition on new systems. And this is really the graph that shows it all. I mean, it's talking about value for money, but if you look at the vertical axis, that talks about emissions. So 404A, highest emissions, that they're effectively gone now. We transitioned through the XP40, the 449A, but then what are the other short choices that we have? We can look at water-cooled and air-cooled integrals, which are old technology, and although they're low capex, they're very energy inefficient. Then we've got CO2, which has been around for quite some time. Again, it's more costly and less energy efficient. And then we've got our products in the XL range, which basically, in terms of cost as well as emissions, are the most favourable, particularly in small commercial refrigeration applications. I won't go into a lot of detail here because we've talked about it a lot. Today there's a lot out there. There's a lot of information out there to help contractors to get what they need, the information that they need. I know it can be confusing sometimes, but one of the things that we're doing as we develop some of the codes of practice and whatever, is to try and not completely simplify to the level where the information is no longer useful, but certainly to make it clearer. And I think guidances are becoming a lot clearer through those different bodies. And now there is actually a a monetary element in that. There is the ability for consultancies, training bodies, and indeed equipment manufacturers and distributors to work with their clients to make sure that they've got all the information that they need to safely use the products. And indeed, Chemours ourselves are also providing support and guidance through those bodies, through those manufacturers and distributors, and directly through our own resources. So lots of information out there. So this is my final slide there. These are long-term sustainable solutions that we're offering, and that we've got that phrase, the sensible choice right now. We just need to get on with it and meet those challenges that F-gas gives us. So that's it from me, Andrew.
Thank you, Mark. That's very good on timing. That's a gold star for that. So we're now joined by Ray again, and by, as already flagged up, some other supply chain experts. We've got Brian Churchard of Asda, Luke Ollie of Central England Cooperative, and Mike Marsden, now of Emerson, or again of Emerson, should we say. So component specialist du jour. I've got a very specific question before I throw the panel wide open. It's about R454 and leak detection. This might be one for you, Mark. Being asked whether there's some confusion, possible lack of clarity over 454C, and whether it needs ATEX leak detectors. Is that something we have to take offline?
Yeah, well, it depends on whether you're detecting a leak before you get a flammable atmosphere. If you do the risk assessment, then you don't need to have an ATEX leak detector, because you're not ever going to get to the flammable atmosphere, because you're going to take the action that stops that flammable atmosphere occurring. So that's the simple answer. You don't need ATEX leak detection when you don't have a flammable atmosphere. It's designed to prevent that.
Okay, great, thanks. And there was one question for Ray, just to fire off. What do we expect the future of? You might have already said this, but it was right at the beginning, so I didn't think about it. What do you expect the future of R410A is with charges over 10 kilos?
I think Mark alluded to this in his talk, or somebody did. R410A is certainly the next refrigerant on the list to be under the most pressure, because it's got the highest GWP of 2088. I did see also I'll comment on these GWP values, very confusing to everybody. The regulation uses values from what's called Assessment Report 4 of the UNFCCC, the Climate Change Convention. Mark, rather confusingly, has used numbers from AR5, so they are not the ones that are used in the regulation. There are further values, AR5 with feedback, and there'll be an AR6, and it's all a bloody nightmare, frankly. From the regulatory point of view at the moment, the only numbers that count are the ones in AR4. So, for example, R134A is 1430, not 1300. 410A, which is 2088 GWP, is under tremendous pressure because of its high GWP. As much as possible of that market has got to shift away from 410A. Being a phase down, not a phase out, there's always space for a bit of 410A in the mix. It's non-flammable. That's a big plus. It's a useful high pressure refrigerant, which is a big plus. So I don't expect it to go straight away, but it's the next one on the list to come under most pressure.
Great, thanks. Right, let's talk to the panel then. We've asked each of them to just introduce where they're coming from at the moment. So I'm going to go to Luke first, if I may.
Morning. Yeah, Luke Ollie, I'm the Energy Environmental Manager for Central London Corp. So we've been on a bit of a journey with A2Ls for a number of years, actually. So, I mean, before that, we replaced a lot of our 448A with 448A, did a rollout of that. Then I was asked to come up with a 10-year strategy for our refrigeration gas in 2018, I think it was actually when we first started having conversations with people within the industry about that. It took us, I think, to sort of early 2020 to get our first 2 systems installed, convenience sites with 2 different types of A2L gases, which we then decided to go forwards with 454C. And we've had that now as our standard spec for well over a year actually now, and had quite a few sites installed with it. I had to actually speak to one of our service engineers this morning because I've not had any noise since all that work was done. So I've not really been in that headspace for probably about a year now in reality. It's doing exactly what we wanted it to do. Really, we've been able to get it to a point where it's pretty much cost neutral versus the 448 that we were doing before. It's significantly lower energy wise, which is obviously the side that I really came from on this. So I'm getting sort of double-digit efficiency savings. So clear differences between that and a number of other systems that we've trialed. Serviceability has been really easy for us, for our contractors to transition over to that. And obviously with HVAC coming with R32 now, there's a lot of the same skills, a lot of the same tools required. So we're getting full sites now on all A2L, fully A2L as standard. So that's really where we're at. It's been embedded within our processes, and you know, we've got a decent amount of sites now running off it. And being business as usual.
And your maintenance guys are comfortable with the maintenance side of it, and it's adapted well.
So availability is not a problem anymore. That obviously when it was right at the beginning, that was a concern for them, but it's not a problem. They can obviously store it on the van relatively easily in sort of light storage around CO2, where can be pretty heavy with the canisters those. So yeah, they've not had any issues really, and obviously you tend to sort of engineer these things with better sort of, particularly for HVAC, we're starting to get leak detection inbuilt with these things as well. So we're starting to be able to do what we should be doing right from the beginning, just making sure it doesn't leak in the first place.
Great, thanks. Right, I'm just the order that I can see you on the screen. So Mike is next on my screen. So Mike.
Good morning. Yeah, so I'm Mike Marsden. I'm recently imposed as Director of End Users at Emerson, in a role that is really there to engage with the retail end users and try and pull through their requirements, which we can then work with our wholesalers, pack manufacturers, with cabinet manufacturers to deliver low GWP solutions. Now, from an Emerson perspective, we don't really favor one technology or another. We work with CO2, we work with hydrocarbons, A2Ls across the UK retail base, and we're trying to offer guidance and provide solutions that will enable people to evaluate the options and not just say, right, in a given store format it must be this or it must be that. Actually, in a particular store format there may be a mixture of technologies, whether it be for plug-in merchandising cabinets or for cold rooms. The retailer may choose something different. If I rewind 8 weeks when I was in my old position with Clade as a manufacturer stroke installer, we were very much focused on what the retailers wanted and what the specifications were there, and it was a process that you went through based on volume. What we're trying to achieve within Emerson is this pull through where we're talking to retailers, talking to consultants, everybody, all of the stakeholders that are in the mix, and then looking at how we can apply our solutions, how we can tweak and bring forward packages that will suit an application for the likes of Luke and Brian. I know in the past, Brian and I have had a conversation around Brian as an end user is wanting people to bring him innovations, but as an OEM manufacturer of the products, it was a case of there's a lot of investment if you haven't got the retail side of it on board. And what we're striving to achieve at Emerson is almost to bridge that gap so that we can pull out of the retailers what they want and then work with their manufacturing partners to deliver solutions that will meet the needs and refrigerants that they want to work with.
Thanks, Mike. Okay, so that's some good news. That it's not just what you can have in the sweet shop anymore. It's making sweets specifically for the customer. That's a terrible analogy. I better go swiftly on to Brian.
Within reason.
Within reason. Yeah. At the right cost. Right, Brian, on that point, at the right cost, here's Brian.
Hey, hi there. Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, so really just echoing what Luke has just said, his experience. We started this journey over a decade ago in terms of technical evaluation of alternative systems, taking what was then an agnostic position on technology. So we went out there, we trialed secondaries, we trialed CO2, we trialed water-cooled integral systems. We benchmarked that against what was then an HFC model, but what I would say is a well-designed, well-installed, well-maintained HFC model. So we made sure that the benchmark measures were always on a fair and like-for-like comparison. This kind of then raised questions specifically around any of those alternatives, around where that would then put us in the future from an environmental emissions perspective, an energy perspective, cost, life cycle impact, all these types of things. That then led us down the road of we need to think differently about this. We need to look at other alternative technology, and at that time HFO was largely not really understood the full benefits. Through the ongoing evaluation, trialing, testing, led by the data, led by the information, not hopes, dreams and thoughts, it really did kind of get us to the place that Luke has just summarized there without going through it all again. 2018, I think, was the first installation. Technical working group that has been set up is quite significant, including others that are coming to that loop in the conversation. Looking to create a robust design standard to ensure that we're addressing all the things that were just talked about on the previous panel around, skills, knowledge, experience, training, all those types of things. And we're in a good place. Systems are going in. Systems now from next year onwards will all be A2L ready. We're taking a position with both case manufacturing and plant manufacturing, which means that we don't have the big bang of installation cost where everything has to come out and all new has to go in. We very seldom change entire refrigeration systems within our estate. It's either or cases or plant. So where we are now, as we change new plants or change new cases, that equipment will be A2L ready. So as and when we get to a point where we align the technology cases or plants, we can then drop in the A2L refrigerants. And from a cost impact perspective, it helps us spread the cost, and it also helps us accelerate the phase out of HFCs rather than just waiting for that big bang. So I'll stop there. That was kind of a whirlwind of where we are at the moment, and back to yourself, Andrew.
Thanks, Brian. In terms of the questions coming in at the moment, they're centered a little bit around compliance and competence, and I think that's quite an interesting point to come back to you on, Brian. Is obviously you work with engineers who you've worked with for a long time, so there's kind of that trust competence issue there already. But when you started putting your systems in, was there I think you referred to sort of belt and braces, didn't you? Sort of over engineer, over safety engineers.
Yeah, we
come back a little from that now.
Yeah, we agreed as a working group back in the 2 years ago, whenever it was, that in the absence of anything else, we will follow the A3 standard, knowing full well that that was bit belts and braces. But we went through that process with open eyes. What we've done from that then is created quite a significant compendium of technical information and detail, which we are prepared to share, and we will be sharing that with FETA as and when. But we know also with the work that organizations like Luke's, the Co-op Luke's organization, is that there are ways to then pare that back. in terms of learnings. And we always knew that was going to happen. But in the absence of anything else, it was always from a DESIR assessment perspective, we start at the top and then we work our way back from that. And you know, DESIR assessments are extremely important. I'm really encouraged with what Graham Fox was saying, that we're now treating refrigerants as refrigerants, that we're hopefully moving away from this two-horse race of conversations around synthetics versus naturals, which from an engineering perspective, and engineers shouldn't really be differentiating between the two. These are chemicals, end of story. They are dangerous chemicals if they're in the wrong hands, whether it's an A1, an A2L, flammable, explosive, toxic, whatever they are, and they all need to be treated as such. So engineer training and engineer application has gone pretty well. Engineers are already trained on the A3 application, and now we pare that back.
Thanks. Looking at the way the discussion's going on the ether, as it were, and the Q&As, there is clearly a need for a balance, isn't there, between setting out that it is not, you know, lower flammability means some degree of flammability. You've got to deal with that, but at the same time, it's straightforward, and it's getting that balance in people's minds for the appropriate risk assessment and the appropriate approach. So it's trying to not underplay it, but not overplay it at the same time. Would you agree with that?
I think we should, like I said before, we should treat them as chemicals and treat them with the respect they deserve. Saying that one is less dangerous than another, I think, is wrong. I think we just need to make sure that engineers have the appropriate understanding, skills, knowledge, and training. I think what was interesting, the comment about a 5-day training course makes you qualified. Well, under, you know, if you look at something like CDM regulation 2015, you need to demonstrate skills, knowledge, and experience. Well, you can't do that with 5 days of training. So I think rather than differentiate between one safer than the other, we have to treat them all with, like I said before, with the respect they deserve, with the right training standards behind it.
There's a couple of questions around. Is there an industry body guide yet to A2Ls? Or you were talking about the standard, Brian. Now, are we waiting for BRA to take that on board with you, or?
Well, we're feeding into FETA directly the information with a compendium of information, and there are individuals on this call now that are also directly involved in that. We have no interest in creating a design standard. We sell tins of beans for a living. But what we have learned and what we have developed, we are going to openly share with the industry to then allow the industry to ensure that those standards that need to be created around this will be created. And there already are. I mean, we're not talking about this, that this is from a standing start. There is already information. One of the comments that was out there earlier was there's a disconnect between the knowledge of this panel versus on the ground. Well, I'm a service engineer. That's my background. I have access to the same information as everybody else. You know, I don't have special access to things others don't. Go out there and find out.
Yeah, there's a word on the lines that EN 378 is a pretty good starting point for people to point people towards in terms of being A2L ready. I'll tell you what I wanted to talk about. For the last month, we've been hearing from one direction or another, nothing but energy efficiency. Energy efficiency. This has been prompted in no small way by the small prize that was on offer from the Americans for people to create an energy efficient air conditioning system. We haven't got $1 million to offer, but our cooling awards are available. Come back to that in a minute. But what I wanted to talk about was this. There's now a groundswell that energy efficiency, particularly in refrigeration and air conditioning, is vital. And Luke, you were saying that that's where but you came in from that background, this sort of the energy side. So, you know, there's obviously a lot of emphasis at the moment in general. You know, the likes of Boris Johnson talking about his carbon reduction with his eye to Glasgow and COP26 obviously helps. But, you know, this is key, isn't it? I guess the focus is just as much on refrigeration as on the rest of your estate for energy efficiency at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, refrigeration is a huge part of our energy consumption, and if you're just going to do good business, you want to keep that as low as possible, really. So, If you took all the environmental aspects away and just sort of looked at it, energy costs are pretty, well, they've increased a lot, and may increase for a little while to come. I think they're going to change over time, so energy costs are not going to necessarily stay the way they are now for that much longer, probably a few more years, and then they're going to start changing. So there's probably sort of peak interest in energy efficiency right now, if I'm honest. As soon as we've decarbonised and as soon as the price goes down, which it will do, then it probably won't be quite so much of an issue. We'll move on to other tricky things like diesel consumption and gas consumption, and that's where your heat pumps kind of kick in. But right now, it's really important that we get it as efficient as possible and keep the foot on the pedal. And for us, as far as stores go, new stores obviously want to be energy efficient, but what's really exciting is getting the demand down as well, getting the system sizes down, getting the charges down. So yeah, obviously that helps with cost, but it helps with the long-term maintenance and risk of refrigeration gas escaping as well.
I was going to throw over to Ray, because you've been flagging up indirect emissions for quite a while now. And whenever it's fair to say, I think that those who are outside the industry get very obsessed with GWP, because that's the number that people, I guess, find easiest to hang on to. But energy efficiency and the indirect emissions is huge.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've been doing a lot of work in this area recently. You may know that for some years I've been doing modelling of future requirements for HFCs, and we've been working on a new version of our model that also predicts future requirements for energy right across the whole of the RACHP industry. It's I mean, for years the industry has talked, of course, about TUI, which is the sum of the direct emissions, greenhouse gas emissions from the refrigerants plus the indirect from the energy. The rule of thumb historically, when we used a lot of high GWP refrigerants, was that energy was still about 70 to 75% of the total emissions, and that refrigerants were maybe 30 to 25% of the total emissions. So energy's always been important, but it becomes even more important as the average GWPs are coming down, and we're making a lot of those F-gas savings more quickly than we're making the energy savings, let's say, then the energy portion becomes an even bigger proportion of the total. And you do get to a point where you get the risk of what one calls an environmentally perverse result, where if you push towards absolute minimum GWP, you might introduce extra energy consumption. And I think there'll be a lot of debate over the coming weeks about, for example, the use of hydrocarbons in split air conditioners, which in the OCO proposals, it made it sound as if that's just dead easy, that all sizes of air conditioners could switch to hydrocarbons. Now, very small air conditioners can certainly switch to hydrocarbons, but as soon as the size gets a little larger, and I'm not talking very large, I'm sort of moving into medium size splits, for example, the safety issues mean you're going to be very restricted on the amount of refrigerant that you might be able to use, and that in itself will reduce the potential to improve energy efficiency, because you need bigger heat exchangers to maximize energy efficiency in refrigeration or air conditioning equipment. So there's always a balance there, and it's a tricky one to calculate, and it's much easier to separate the two policies completely and say, oh, well, energy is being dealt with by somebody else, we're just going to deal with the F-gas bit. But that's very short-sighted. And then the heat pump side becomes even more vital. That if some recent calculations that we've done for the whole of Europe show that the sort of residual amount of F-gases you might have in place with the current regulation is completely swamped by at least an order of magnitude, i.e. 10 times, by the amount of fossil fuel that can be abated by the use of heat pumps. So if we can put more heat pumps in place in 2050, for example, which is the date that everyone's talking about for net zero, the contribution from heat pumps to very low carbon heating is 10 times, possibly 20 times bigger than the tiny bit of residual HFCs that might be being emitted at that time. So that's not to say we shouldn't do everything possible to minimize that, the HFC bit, but we must take the big picture into account.
Ray, that reminds me very much of conversations that I used to be involved in about 5-10 years ago about solar panels, and everybody saying obviously the inbuilt carbon to manufacture those, and there were plenty of people saying that you shouldn't really be looking at them.
The whole issue of embodied carbon is another truck coming down the highway for another probably for another session, but that is starting to come up certainly in our sister magazines on the architect side. There, embodied carbon, the whole life cycle carbon is a thing coming up the track. But I won't distract you with that. The folk on the Q&As are saying we need to, as an industry, we need to make sure that the discussions about Chewy and the whole life cycle are forefronted so that GWP doesn't get the people who are obsessive about GWP don't get all the headlines. I think that's to summarize it. I'm not going to say much more about that. I'm going to just quickly shift it over to Mark and say the numbers that you would do. I think you probably did it with Brian, that your life cycle numbers on the latest A2Ls were showing decent energy gains over the predecessor. Is that right?
Yeah, no, I mean, again, building on what Brian did originally to look at store architecture and the solutions they were going to use. I make no bones about it. We've used the real data that was collected through that process and used consultants to do proper apples with apples comparisons. And it's really actually, strangely enough, it's the first time it's really been done, to have a look to see what is the energy use of the different technologies. And you can get more out of CO2 by adding bells and whistles, parallel compression. You get it to work in hotter climates, but the thermodynamics, it's chemistry. It's a refrigerant. You just treat it as a chemical. There's nothing special about the fact that it's in the atmosphere and it's got a GWP of 1. It's a refrigerant, and you can get a certain amount out of it, but it only goes so far. We've found some other products that you can get a bit more out of, but again, potentially for perhaps smaller applications, or where because we have charge side limitations, because there's always an Achilles heel with every technology. And for us, it's that low flammability, that needs to be considered. So, on the safety point. So, I think we've started the debate, I think, out there, which is, look at it from a database point of view. Take the emotion out of it. The whole thing around saying natural refrigerant against synthetic is puts an emotional side on there. You can't put emotion in when it comes to climate change. You've got to reduce carbon in any way you can, and I think we've now put that there. We call it, we put these campaigns together, and I think we need to, come and attack us. Come and attack the data. It's not really happening. It's more people attacking us, perhaps more on an emotional basis. So we just want a fair crack of the whip, as it were. A fair
level playing
chance.
field. Level playing field.
Level playing field. Thank you. Yeah, that's it.
Refrigerant agnostic and all those good phrases that we've come up with. Yes, thank you. Ray, do you think that COP and Glasgow is really going to throw an opportunity, I guess, for the refrigeration industry and heat pumps as well, I guess, to to push the carbon reduction on that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the cooling has never been so much in the energy spotlight as it has over the last, let's say, 4 or 5 years. A whole series of big reports from the International Energy Agency, predicting massive growth of air conditioning in Article 5 countries. A new body called the Cool Coalition, which comes under the auspices of the UN. And this is looking at mainly at energy. So energy is increasingly on, energy in the cooling sector is getting on the political radar screen, which is good. I think that this whole the point about trying to be agnostic over refrigerants is absolutely crucial. And I hate when I see these sort of claims that switching from refrigerant A to refrigerant B has saved 25%. Yeah, that's never going to happen. Thermodynamically speaking, the refrigerant, unless you made an unbelievably stupid choice of refrigerants won't deliver a 25% difference in performance. Yeah, they might, a 5%, definitely, possibly as much as 10%. The rest of it is coming from the bigger picture. It's coming from the holistic design, better, putting doors on cabinets, putting EC fans, LED lights, better heat exchangers, microchannels. But yeah, the list goes on and on. It's the whole equipment design that, yes, delivers 25%, possibly delivers 50% improvement in energy efficiency. But let's not try and pretend it's the refrigerant that delivers that. It's the design that delivers that. And somebody on the chat made the important point that the national grid in the UK, our electricity carbon factor has much improved over the last decade because of wind power and solar, and so mainly wind power. And they quite rightly made the point that actually is keeping pace with the average drop in GWP of the refrigerants. So that sort of 70-30 rule of thumb that I mentioned for the TUI, the energy being 70%. And I perhaps incorrectly said, as the GWPs come down, then the energy gets even more important. But to be fair, the grid is coming down as well. But that's at great cost. And we must always put efficiency first and then decarbonized electricity second, in my opinion.
I think the important thing with it's quite easy to grab headlines. It's been proven it's quite easy to grab headlines with GWP, but engineer, at the end of the day, it's about putting the systems in so they work efficiently, and that comes down to engineering. It's almost like I've read some of Brian's previous output on that, but there's also being said on the chat at the moment, funnily enough, from the engineers, it comes down to good engineering, which is true. We have 5 minutes left, gentlemen, already. I wanted just to shout very quickly the fact that both FITA and IOR have guides to A2L refrigerants. So please look at those. The person who was asking for third-party representative body information, that's where you can find it. Right, so we now reach that point where I have to ask you, well, what's our takeaway? We've had 2 hours of quite rambunctious debate. Skills are clearly going to be part of this, but what do you folk think that we should be taking away as an audience? I will go to Mike first.
Okay. I think that the key takeaway for me is that people need to consider the options that are available to them. Don't just on the bandwagon of one technology or one architecture because they've seen somebody speaking about it. There are a lot of people out there that have had experiences, that are willing to share their experiences, and just because it works for them may not work for you. As Ray said, what you do in a store in terms of do you put doors on, shelf edge technology, all of those other aspects will have an impact. And then the next phase is, do you then look at what you can integrate? Can you integrate your heating and cooling systems so that you're gaining the benefit of the heat that you're generating to cool back when, to potentially preheat water? So what can you do holistically in your store environment to give you the best solution from an energy perspective, a life cycle, CapEx, OpEx, all of the key things that Mark listed earlier, and evaluate it from that perspective. Do some simulations and reach out for help. You know, as I said, there's lots of people out there that are willing to support and help. And I know from an Emerson perspective, we're willing to engage with anybody and have those discussions and help where we can.
Thanks, Mike. It occurs to me that what better headline for Boris Johnson at the COP26 talks to say we're mandating doors on fridges. I, for one, will be celebrating if that was the case. Luke, over to you. What's the takeaway?
I actually attend a retail energy forum regularly, and that's pretty much all we talk about every time is doors on fridges. We are so sick of it.
Yeah, we'll come up with a voluntary agreement,
Luke.
Luke. Come on. Yeah, you're leading the way.
Absolutely. There's other people who struggle with it a little bit more. So as I guess from our side, we've heard a lot recently in the news about groupthink. And it's a good term. I think it's important, just building on what Mike said, really, to look at what you're truly trying to achieve. What was exciting when I was asked to come up with a strategy, 10-year strategy, was they were giving me the freedom, my manager was giving me the freedom to look at all the options, just like Brian was doing, to generally look at the situation that you're going to be facing into now and also in the future, and to look at the technologies. What's really exciting is that they're all there now. We've got a menu of great solutions, and we've probably got 10 years in reality to really make the transition. If we don't get it by 2030, we're not going to do it. So we've really got to put foot down and get on with it. So find the solution, make sure it works for you, and then crack on, really.
Crack on. Yeah, good. Brian.
Probably two things, just to echo these points. You know, when we talk about decarbonisation of the grid, energy is absolutely key. Whether it gets decarbonised or not, we're paying for energy. But what that brings into light is the importance of CHUI. It makes it even more important as energy reduces, as carbon associated to energy reduces, as GWP reduces, what you end up with total equivalent warming impact, and that brings it into light even more. A little bit of rewinding back to the first panel. We are many years down the road. We're still talking about skills. We're still talking about refrigerant leakage, irrelevant of the refrigerant, irrelevant of GWP. We get so hung up on GWP, it's quite incredible sometimes. That's the most important thing as part of this is making sure that best engineering practice is followed. Again, was touched in the first group, and I've been saying this for a long time. You apply best engineering practice, it's incredible how well these things work, regardless of refrigerant of choice. And finally, a little bit of contention is that the way we talk about leakage, skills, knowledge, and experience, food for thought. If we were the petrochemical industry, would we still be in business? It's possible.
Thanks, Brian. We'll just take a little gasp at that and contemplate that as we move on to Ray.
I think my reflection is something I picked up on the news this morning, a WMO report saying that we're getting to the 1.5 degree centigrade level in the next 4 or 5 years. You know, that was what Paris was trying to say, that the world should never get there. And we're on the verge of 1.5 degrees. I think the climate issue, we haven't seen even the start of it. I think the proverbial shit will hit the fan in 10 years' time in a big way if we don't get our act together. So I'll pick up on Luke's comment, crack on. We've got a lot of the technologies. We understand both reducing the HFC, high GWP gases, and we understand a lot about energy efficiency. And we've got to get on with it. We really, and stop talking about it. When I say we, I mean kind of our very able leaders. Perhaps they're able, perhaps they're not.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges that we all face, and we face it on the trade media, is that there is a lot of discussion. I mean, we're having a discussion now, but there's been an awful lot of discussion in the last year around cooling issues, but quite a lot of it is in very sort of highfalutin what if language, and we need to get on with the as Brian said, the best practice and the engineering. Start with the engineering. Mark, it falls to you to conclude as the sponsor of this fine event.
Yeah, first of all, I'd just like to thank everybody for their questions and the panel for their input. It's a great forum to be able to put forward the latest, and there's always progress. From what Ray was saying, compared to when we had this discussion last year, there's so much activity that's gone on, even despite COVID. But now, I think the message to get out there to end users, to the contractors that serve those end users, there's a lot of end users that, smaller end of the market who are led by their contractors, and that there's nothing else. There's not a magic bullet that's going to come along and suddenly do all of this. All the tools are out there. You've got it. So you've got to get out and start doing something with it. And okay, maybe costs will come down. Luke, as I said, we've got some cost parity now with some of the newer technologies compared to the old, which is good. But that comes with mass production, more innovation. We're great innovators in this country. I've seen the work that that Emerson have done, with Mike, and then obviously putting that into some of the system OEMs. It's all there. The packs are available, the condensing units are available, the technology is there. Don't wait for something else to come through. It's not going to come in the time scale that we need to be able to meet the challenges that we've got for energy, for climate change, particularly. So get on and do it. COVID will end, or to the extent that we have to lock down, and that recovery is the time to sort of get out there and start getting systems changed out, the old leaky stuff replaced, and crack on, as you said.
Thank you, Mark. I mean, I for one will be looking forward to the opportunity to have these events where we can have the follow up in the breaks, where with a little bit of the old finger pointing goes on with the networking, and we can press our points further. Well, that will come. But this one has been again a successful debate, and it's thanks to you folk on the panel, the speakers, and especially to the guys in the audience who've been tremendously prolific this time, keeping me on my toes with the amount of questions that have come in. I hope I've done you all justice. If I haven't, then feel free to drop me an email and we will circulate that conversation. The slides, I believe, will be available, hopefully, looking for nods from the presenters, so we'll be able to do that. And it just leaves me to thank, as I say, all you folk, and to the sponsor, of course, Chemours, for making this possible. If anybody wants to talk to me about a heat pump for the cooling industry conversation, we can have that. We've all had our subtle little adverts in for various things today, and it would be remiss of me not to mention the Cooling Awards still open for business. A couple more weeks. We've talked about best practice. We've talked about innovation. This is the chance to demonstrate it. But thank you all once again. We've only gone 7 minutes over, which to me is an achievement. Thanks very much, and we'll see you again soon. Goodbye.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, both. Bye-bye. Thank you.